Etch-a-Sketch draws and writes like magic. Turn the knobs and the lines go up and down and all around. No crayons, no chalks, never any mess. Turn Etch-a-Sketch upside down and shake and everything disappears.
Magical silvery screen, hi-oh, heart. Etch-a-Sketch, turn the dials and you'll see what I mean. Yeah, your fun time starts with Etch-a-Sketch. A line appears magically, shaking upside down, it's all you'll see. Oh, hi-oh, heart. Etch-a-Sketch.
Mama, come see.
Oh, it's beautiful. But Pablo, why two noses?
Etch-a-Sketch. Lots of fun for budding young Picassos.
In 2019, I had the opportunity to have a solo show at the Harold Washington Library in Chicago, the main branch of the Chicago Public Library. And so I had my art on display on the 7th floor, which is like the art floor, basically. And a filmmaker was at the library during that time, checked out my art, reached out to me, and basically pitched the idea of doing like a mini doc about me. So it was a crew of 2 people. They just came to my studio space and they did a fantastic job. That's the video series is called Everyday Stories. My name is Jane Labowitch and I'm an Etch-a-Sketch artist. When I first started drawing on an Etch-a-Sketch, I was fascinated by the fact that you had to use both hands to operate it. And I always thought that that was such a unique way to create art. For me, growing up, it was like having an infinite stack of paper. I could just shake it, erase it, and then start something new. And I had no idea that this was something that other people couldn't do until I got older. I find that limitation breeds creativity. I personally love the limitations of Etch-a-Sketch. Every Etch-a-Sketch is different. So some have thicker lines, some have tighter knobs. So you sort of, with your muscle memory, develop a feel for every unique canvas. Princess Etch kind of became my Etch-a-Sketch persona. I really feel like that is kind of who I am. I like to wear kooky clothes and I love the color red. So like it is a true reflection of myself. I am definitely an Etch-a-Sketch collector. So at any given time, I usually have at least around 300 or so. Right now, it could be up to like 500. So many Etch-a-Sketches have been released over the years in so many sizes and varieties and colors and shapes. It's just really fun to collect them. I think that Etch-a-Sketch itself is such a nostalgic toy that it kind of lends itself to a lot of these things like the memes and the pop culture. On a small Etch-a-Sketch, it could take anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes up to 1.5 to 2 hours. And then on the classic Etch-a-Sketch, it could take anywhere from like an hour for something very simple up to like 15 to 20 hours for something really detailed. I created a life-size rendition of a skeleton using 11 different Etch-a-Sketches. And that was a very major personal accomplishment for me because it was a project that I had envisioned in 2012, and it took me 4 years to actually make that project come to life. Inside of an Etch-a-Sketch, there's aluminum powder, and when you shake the Etch-a-Sketch, it's that powder that recoats the screen. The lines that you see on an Etch-a-Sketch are actually the stylus scraping the powder off the screen. So once you shake it, it kind of resets it to a blank slate. There are 2 schools of preservation. The first one is referred to as drill and drain. The second one is referred to as the complete dismantling. Once I remove that powder, I lock down the knobs so that you can no longer create new lines on the art. Over the years, I've definitely streamlined the process, but there were a lot of broken Etch-a-Sketches, a lot of ruined art, but I have sent work all over the world and it's great. It's been a long time since I've accidentally ruined an Etch-a-Sketch rendition. There have been times where I've accidentally dropped an Etch-a-Sketch in the middle of a rendition, and it's almost akin to like watching an art piece you've created just spontaneously combust. Thankfully, I think I've gotten so used to carrying my work that it's just kind of second nature. I continue Etch-a-Sketching because I still find it a blast. It also allows me to work with like really cool people, really cool companies. There are a lot of opportunities that only a few of us can do. I cannot believe that this is my life. Like, I cannot believe that I'm actually playing with an Etch-a-Sketch for a living. I can't think of another toy that teaches you a lesson like that, to let go and to appreciate something at the moment it exists and then move on and then create something new. The stories that I've had, I've been able to travel the world thanks to Etch-a-Sketch. And I think, like, is this real life? It's crazy, and I just want to, like, keep etching. I have been extremely fortunate. Yeah. I've been super lucky that like different film crews and different like production companies have decided that, my story is worth sharing because they bring all of their expertise, all of their amazing equipment that I could never afford. And they come and they film my story every single video I've gotten made about my work has just been like fantastically produced, much beyond my own like personal capabilities.
Right, but you're really well spoken, and so I think they know their job is going to be easy with you because you explain. A lot of artists don't, a lot of visual artists, they're visual artists for a reason, and you seem to be a really good spokesman, not only for yourself but for like your art, which it's interesting. That's why I was attracted to you too, because
thank you.
Good storyteller.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having an interesting conversation with someone who was at a news station in Chicago who was featuring about me. And I asked them about like why they chose to feature me or, do they often feature other artists? And they said, actually, we don't usually feature artists because it's hard to share their story without it seeming kind of stagnant or without some kind of like performance aspect included in it. And one of the benefits of me with my Etch-a-Sketch art is that I usually can create like a very quick live performance as well as part of like the news segment. And thankfully I have a lot of experience now being in front of a camera when it comes to in-person live interviews and such. So that's definitely a skill I developed over time. I look back at some of my earliest news interviews, and thankfully my very first news interview was for WGN Morning News, and that was pre-recorded. So the pressure was a lot lower for that. but thanks to the experience I've had with doing a lot of live interviews, it's made it a lot easier for me and I'm a lot more comfortable now in front of the camera.
Yeah, well, it's just, as you know, the more you do it, the easier it gets, right?
Absolutely.
Obviously.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that makes your job a little easier is that people like math and science, people all say they suck at art, they suck at drawing, right? There is a big turnoff when it comes to art in terms of themselves. But there's a warm, cuddly, homey feeling about Etch-a-Sketch, right? And because it's hard to really screw it up. I mean, I obsessed, and I'll talk about this later on, but I obsessed with just making, and I'm a professional artist myself, and I mostly portraits and murals, but when I was a kid, I would just, before I drew, I was on Etch-a-Sketch, just obsessing on the line, going back and forth and seeing how dark I could make it, seeing if I could see inside the machine, if I could make a dark gray cloud to see the inner workings. And it was like a real obsessive compulsive thing with the Etch-a-Sketch for me. Probably a lot of people, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely, I think when it comes to Etch-a-Sketch, you can really get in the zone. Like time can fly by and you don't even realize it because you're doing something so like therapeutic and methodical. I love that about Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah.
Like
and it's
that's I think one of the things that attracted me as a young kid.
Yeah, and it's kind of out of your hands, so you don't feel like it's necessarily a self-expression. You're playing with a machine. And so it takes the onus off you to make art, like and it's also temporary. So it's like those Buddhist sand art, it's going to go away. So, which is healthy for, I think, progress. So good potters will say it's really healthy to break your pottery, like throw it against the wall, break it until you finally get to a point where you're not so precious with your early work. And
that's cool. I never heard that before.
Yeah,
it's
a big thing with potters, Buddhist potters, like Asian potters.
Yeah,
they would just always, and as coming from a drawing background, there's a sickness I call preciousness in art, and people, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think I can infer what you mean just from my experience with drawing, where people like, I know I'm definitely guilty of it sometimes, where like even every page in my sketchbook is like a precious thing where I spend so much time like trying to make it like nice and perfect and not just like scribbling on the page and wasted paper. Like to me, I definitely can fall into that.
Yeah, and I do too. I save a lot of my drawings. I probably shouldn't, but to me, I don't know about you, but drawings for me activate my memory. I know what I was doing that day, where I was. I remember a lot of things when I look at those drawings. It's weird, especially now I'm older. It's even weirder because my memory is not what it used to be. But the drawings
Yeah.
still kind of like they're like a neurological. I don't know, what would you call it? Like almost like photographic paper of that instant in your life when you were just doing something really intensely, and there's a shadow of that day in your life. I don't know. It's weird.
I can relate. You know, one thing I regret is that when I was really young, I used to date my work very specifically. And then there was a good chunk of my life growing up where I stopped dating my art. And I really regret that because I might have some vague memories associated with the drawings, but I can't exactly like chronologically place where I was when I created the work. So like
Right.
I've tried to get a lot better about doing that.
I would buy those big Utrecht canvas covered books. Remember those books? The big black
Yes.
ones? The big
Yeah.
black ones. And they're too big for bookshelves. They don't fit. They have to go sideways in bookshelves. But I had those, and they had a little place in the beginning to date it. So I put the date in there. So I knew this
that's
is a
nice.
1992 book, So I go, probably in Maine when I did this one, But yeah, I didn't have
cool.
the discipline to do that either. But yeah, and you do things besides. I saw your doodle art. I don't mean to be pejorative, but it seems to be a more graphic kind of
Yeah,
design
that's what I
art.
call it too. Is my
That's what I
doodle
thought.
art.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's really good. And I think that it's part of your oeuvre, right? Is that how you say it? Oeuvre.
Yeah. It is. And it's funny. So I have a degree in illustration.
Okay, I didn't know that. Where'd you go to school?
I went to the American Academy of Art in Chicago.
Which is pretty traditional.
Yes, it's a
Yeah.
very classical school.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, when you brought up
absolutely.
Utrecht, so when I was attending the academy, the Utrecht was downstairs in the same building in Chicago. So that was so fantastic to have as a student there. But yes, I actually was really attracted by the classical approach that the academy had versus the more contemporary approaches to other schools like SAIC and such. I basically just wanted to be trained as a skilled draftsman. That was kind of my number one primary goal there. And my hope was that along the way, I would learn other soft skills necessary to be a successful artist. But I figured the most important thing I could learn during my 4-year tenure in art school was how to create good art. so I really liked that that kind of ethos they had. And I think
Yeah.
it served me well so far. I mean, the faculty was incredible during my time there. So, but it's been a hustle since graduation for sure. It's difficult to have a career in art. I think no matter which path you go, with or without art school. So, did you attend art school as well?
No, I majored in art at a liberal arts college down here in Illinois, and I'm from Chicagoland, so I relate to all these places. I lived in WGN as a kid. I mean, you're not from Chicago originally, are you?
I'm originally from Michigan, but I spent the
Yeah.
last 11 years in Chicago.
Yeah.
So I started art school in 2009, and then
Mhm.
from 2009 to last year, I was in Chicago.
Yeah, so I grew up in Chicagoland, the suburbs, and I went to Knox College, and where I met my wife, and ended up majoring in art. But I was an aerospace engineering student for 2 years before I transferred into Harper College in Chicagoland. There, a 2-year school to get my bearings. Because I wasn't willing to call myself an artist, even though I drew incessantly my entire life. And I was called an artist by my friends. I mean, and teachers called me the artist in the class. But when I got to college, I didn't relate to art students because I was more of the jock in high school. You get pigeonholed in high school.
Yeah.
And I was more of the rough and tumble jock kind of guy, who
Okay.
was into cars and spaceships and things like that. But I thought maybe I should be an astronaut. Maybe I should be a pilot. Maybe I should be an engineer. But I got turned around when I finally went to Knox and I took some fine art classes, and I was like, oh man, I love Pontormo and Michelangelo and Leonardo. And I always liked Leonardo. So I was like, okay, I get that. I could relate to Leonardo back to when I was 6 years old when I got the Time Life books in the mail, and I just
Cool.
obsessed on Leonardo da Vinci's drawings, right? So I finally decided that's it for me. And I had more of a conservative art taste like the people over at the Academy there, Chicago. I had a mentor, Carlo Pittori, who I met, and when I graduated college, I went to live in Maine in a hut in the woods for 2 years on a yurt. And he had a little art colony. So I studied nude models for 2 years. All I did was make money to have models and food, and I just really tried to cut my teeth on drawing naked people. and which is like the hardest thing to draw, right? So if you could draw naked people, you could draw anything. So that was kind of the mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that was one of my favorite things about attending the academy specifically, is that they force every freshman to have a nice foundation in life drawing. You know, you
Right.
take 2 semesters of that, and I really appreciated that. In fact, drawing from life has had a major influence on my current career path, because one of the things I do as an Etch-a-Sketch artist is I'll go to live events and draw people's portraits. And it's like vaguely similar to the concept of a caricature artist, but I'm doing speed life drawings. It's
You
not
are.
accentuated or anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just so happens to be that the medium is Etch-a-Sketch. And yeah, I mean, I've always had a love for drawing from life. Even as some of my earliest memories in life are sitting at my high chair doing still lifes on scrap paper. So I've just always liked capturing what's in front of me, regardless of the medium of choice. And, Etch-a-Sketch is, it's become my primary medium.
Right.
It's, it puts the bread on the table for me, and I love it. I mean, I'm so grateful that I get to do this, but I love all kinds of art. I draw. I haven't painted in a long time, but I did a fair amount of that in college. I work digitally a lot, and I've become really multidisciplinary. After I graduated from college, I worked as a photo retoucher and graphic designer. So I was working very digitally. I was on Photoshop from my 9 to 5. And then I'd go home and play with an Etch-a-Sketch as my part-time. I would supplement my income with my freelance work. And I really love all kinds of art. It's just Etch-a-Sketch has been my focus, and I don't mind that, because
No.
Etch-a-Sketch being my focus has been really great, because it's such a nice specific niche, and that's always really beneficial to have as an artist. And I still practice other kinds of art all the time. Like, I'm
Right.
still drawing in the background. I create most of my, I'm a graphic designer still. I create most of my marketing and promotional materials. I'm a video editor now, because I edit my own time-lapse videos and everything. So I'm still, dabbling in a lot of different creative media as I work, which is great.
Yeah, and I was trying to think about this interview today at 3 a.m. I usually wake up at 3 a.m. the night before, and my best thoughts come to me about but I was thinking about Etch-a-Sketch, like, what am I going to ask her about that? And I started thinking about myself, but I was also thinking about in my own impression, and how it is a warm and cuddly medium that everyone understands, or lots of people do. The baby boom generation was raised on Etch-a-Sketches, right? But
Yeah.
Etch-a-Sketch is kind of like what's the poetry that's really condensed? The Japanese poetry, I think it's
Like haiku?
It's like a haiku in the sense that it's so limited, right? And you
Yeah.
have to make a portrait of Bob Ross, right? But you have to do it on the XY coordinate system with a little bit of looping when you do the simultaneous knobbing. But everyone knows that you're not cheating, that you're not taking it off and just drawing it out on the screen. You're
Right.
using those knobs. And so we know the difficulty of the job of So the medium imposes itself, and so it's like a sonnet or a haiku. Like, the medium you're working in, and we appreciate at a different level. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why it's been easier for me to experience success sharing my work on Etch-a-Sketch, because there's already this like really well established understanding that it's a difficult medium to work in. In some ways, I have to make sure to keep myself in check, because I could technically get lazy, because the level of which people can be impressed by my work, the bar is a lot lower than if I were to challenge myself more in other artistic mediums, because while there's still an understanding that painting and drawing is difficult, I think one of the things is that, like, I think there's an easier barrier to entry with those things. So I have to push myself more in those. And so, like, with Etch-a-Sketch, if I have a bad day on Etch-a-Sketch, people may not necessarily notice it, because they can be impressed if I could do something like a circle. So, to me, a circle is child's play. It's like, I don't even think about it. But to the general public, I understand that, like, a circle is like the highest echelon of difficulty on an Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah.
So it's weird to be in that position where I recognize that, like, I don't necessarily have to try to impress others.
Right.
But I still want to challenge myself, because I want to grow as an artist.
Right. And as George Bush would say, there's a strategery to what you do, right? Because
Yes.
there's lots of, and people who've used it know, you just can't plop your pencil down the middle of a beautiful piece of paper. You get to do that once with Etch a Sketch, right? Once, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
you pick one starting spot. That's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so you have to do a lot of backtracking. You want to explain
Yes.
what that means to the audience here? Once we get one?
Absolutely. So say I'm working on, a drawing of a person and I finish the left eye and I decide that I want to work on the right side of the face. Well, I can't just draw a line clear across the face to get to the right eye because then it's going to look like they have a unibrow or something. So what I need to do is I need to completely trace over regions of my drawing and bring the stylus inside of the Etch-a-Sketch to a point on the other side of the screen where I can make like a discrete connecting line.
Right.
So it's all about perfectly retracing over aspects of the drawing that I've already created. So I'm not creating too many distracting connecting lines. That's something I'm always very conscious about, especially with portraiture.
Right. And because people are, I always say, I'm a portrait painter. I've done that. And people are ruthless, especially if you're drawing someone's kid or somebody or a famous person they know because they know faces,
Yeah.
right? You can't fudge it. You can fudge a landscape to some degree, but you're not going to fudge a face. People, even non-artists, they could tell, right?
Yes,
It looks
absolutely. And
wrong.
capturing a likeness is already hard enough in pencil. It's a whole extra challenge with Etch-a-Sketch. And not every drawing I've made is a winner, but
Yeah. And you get one shot. You can't erase it.
yeah, exactly. There's no like taking an eraser to the Etch-a-Sketch to erase the eye that's a little off or wonky. It's really an all or nothing medium. I always like to describe it as it's akin to taking a Sharpie, plopping it down on a sheet of paper, drawing with it, but never being allowed to pick it up. So basically you have to 100% commit to every single line you draw. And as I'm working, it's more apparent in my time lapse videos if I go at a bit of a slower speed. But as I'm working, I'm course correcting constantly along the way. Like I might like go back over certain regions and smooth things out a little bit or thicken up certain lines. And I'm always constantly paying attention to proportions throughout whatever I'm looking at, whatever the reference photo is. If it's a person, I'm looking at the negative space on, different regions of the face, or I'm looking at especially with the eyes, you want to make sure that they're level with one another. There's just so many minute proportions that like, if you don't nail them, then the likeness is just completely off.
Do you use any tricks like using a mirror or something to get the symmetry on the eyes?
So I don't use a mirror. Every now and then I'll use like I'll throw down like a ruler and just like lay it flat on the Etch-a-Sketch.
Right.
But when I'm doing the time lapses, I'm using
ruler right
absolutely
here.
nothing because yes, exactly. Like a clear ruler.
Clear ruler. Yeah.
Yeah. When I'm doing time lapses, I'm using nothing whatsoever because
Right. You're showing
part
off.
of-
That's right. Yeah.
exactly, like part of the magic of it is watching it just like appear with like and for me it's like a really fun personal challenge because like they don't necessarily turn out perfectly when I'm not being like as precise as I conceivably can with all the tools at my disposal. But I think to me, it's a really fun challenge to force myself to literally use no additional aids and just use my trained eye. And, I've been Etch-a-Sketching now for 25 years. So at this point, it's a high pressure, high stakes way to create art, but I kind of live for that thrill. So if I don't nail it the first time, I'm usually willing to just erase and start over until I get it to like my satisfaction. I'm really not a fan of posting anything unless I'm already personally proud of it.
Right. That's your broken pots, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of like, I actually did a video really recently about this idea. I was trying to draw a hand. My boyfriend's hand was like laying on
Hands
on the
are
side of the
just the audience knows hands are like the hardest. They're harder in faces, I think.
Yeah.
It's-
Hands, and I've always had a
it's all the-
fascination with drawing hands. Yeah.
They're hard.
I agree. They were something that vexed me growing up. I just
Oh yeah. Well, there's all these. There's just foreshortening, right?
Yes.
Perspective of layering. There's all the art problems are involved in the hand because it's so mutable, right? It's just doing like what hand are you drawing? The crucified hand or the it's what's a hand? It's crazy. I think it's really hard.
exactly. And another thing that makes hands even more difficult, in my opinion, is that every person's hand is different too. Like even the proportions of the lengths of the different digits can differ from person to person. And so I know that like most of the hand drawings I've done are of my own hand. So I'm used to drawing my hand specifically. But then when I go to try to draw someone else's hand, like I took a photo of my boyfriend's hand, I realized the proportions of, the distance between his index finger and his thumb differ from mine. And I had to kind of recalibrate as I worked. I tried drawing his hand like 5 or 6 times. I decided to make a video about it where every outtake, and I just talked about how every time I created this drawing of a hand on Etch-a-Sketch, I found something wrong with it and I wasn't satisfied enough with it to commit to it. And it ended up being a really cool video that was really well received because so many artists are so used to only sharing their successes, right? So it's nice to talk about the journey
but
that
the audiences love. I'm learning this on TikTok. If you want to get high audience, do fails. Fails will get you massive views. If you're Mr. Perfect, you're going to get in the low hundreds or thousands, but you do a fail, you're up in, I did a fail where my bridge blew up, right? It just blew up. And I swore, I said, God damn it, but Kakashi cut off the damn it, which made it even funnier because it looked like I lost my temper, right?
Yeah.
And that got, someone said 400,000 views now. And it was
that's
just
incredible.
Just a fail. But yeah, so go ahead, finish up what you're saying with the hands. I think it's one of my favorite subjects, actually.
Yeah, and I've definitely developed an obsession for drawing hands over the years because it was a challenge that I gave to myself around early in my high school years, where I wanted to figure out how to draw hands, and so I became obsessed with drawing them. I had this like cork board in my bedroom that I just filled with drawings of hands, and I was practicing a bunch. And of course, with practice, you get better at things just inevitably. And now
How old were you? How old were you when you did the hand drawings?
So I started when I was around 13, 14. I started getting pretty obsessive with hands. And I wish I was like that with other things that I was challenged by, because it would have only been to my benefit. But I mean, now I look forward to the prospect of drawing hands because they're so much fun to me, but they used to be very intimidating for me to do.
The art historian Vasari, the one who wrote the history of Renaissance artists, Claudio Vasari, I think his name was, but Vasari, he wrote the first art history book. He talked about how his art theory was that you're better off being a painter if you're a beautiful person, if you're physically a beautiful person, because you end up making people look like you. So, and he did a whole comparative anatomy study of artists, and it was very funny because there's some really ugly baby Jesuses and ugly holy families, and he's like, that's because the artist was ugly, and
they were using themselves as a reference,
because they know that's because that's what they learned, especially back then when they probably didn't have the deep study that they did go to school for years, and they're just workmen. They're workmanlike in their art making, right? They had to make lots of. But he said the reason why Raphael was such a great painter, one of the reasons was he was a superstar. He was a beautiful man. He was a celebrity. He was gorgeous, and so look at every person he makes is beautiful. So and Michelangelo had struggled with that because he was a disfigured man with a crushed nose from being punched in the face. So he struggled with it, with getting that real pretty art that Raphael came so facile, so easy. But I just find that you're talking about hands. I think we draw the hands we know. Like you said, you drew your hands the best because that's ones you know. And they're a different animal than looking at your boyfriend's hands, which are thicker and different proportions in the digits. So I find this whole subject just fascinating.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a great point. I remember that being a common subject brought up during critiques in college. Where the teacher could basically identify who did what drawing on the board because they all look like ourselves. We are our easiest, most accessible reference material to work with. So oftentimes we're taking photos of ourselves or looking in the mirror while we're creating drawings of people. And I absolutely agree. It's almost inevitable because we're so used to, like you said, being our own reference material. Like we've practiced drawing ourselves more than we have others. And
measuring beauty, looking in the mirror, measuring our, especially, and it's got to be different. And it just sounds sexist, but I think women have different challenges than men when it comes to art because men don't scrutinize their own personal beauty like women do. And I find that lots of female realistic artists tend to have to get past the hurdle of makeup. And even my sister, who's not an artist, I was going to paint her, and she came all made up. I'm like, what's all that stuff in your face? She goes, well, I want to look beautiful. I'm like, no, I want to make you beautiful. Get
Oh.
that shit off your face,
Oh, that's so funny.
But there's something about our society, and it's probably been like that forever, where women's job is to look beautiful, right? So being an artist and a woman, I think poses a different kind of challenge, because I think sometimes beauty is different than cosmetics, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I have I guess a rather unique perspective on this, because I definitely feel that social pressure to wear makeup, but I don't wear makeup. There's like very few occasions in life where I choose to wear it, and it's usually when I know I'm going to be in front of the camera for something really important, and it's almost out of obligation because of studio lighting or something. So for that reason, I find myself in a strange position where I have 3 older sisters, and they have tried as they could to get me into makeup. They really, really tried. And I was very rebellious against it. so, so it's weird though, because it's like I'm the only girl I know, and it's strange because I'm also really into fashion, and I'm part of lots of communities where people are also passionate about very specific like substyles of fashion and everything, but they don't but everyone else wears makeup. So it's a unique position to be in. It's great because I've got way more time in my day. On Facebook through
Yeah, we
Zoom.
did. We just did. We're live. And just
Hello.
for my audience, I want to introduce you all to Jane. Is it Labowitch?
Labowitch, yep.
Jane Labowitch, and she is she's Princess Etch, and she's a very wonderful artist, and she also happens to be a very popular Etch-a-Sketch artist. And but she does. We were talking about this before we went on the air here, that she does lots of other kinds of art too. And she studied classical art at the Chicago Academy of Art? Is that what it's called?
American Academy of Art in Chicago.
American Academy of Art in Chicago, right? And it's a great school. And so we were just, as we went live, we were talking about women being artists, but also women before, even if they're not artists, are kind of artists of their own face and their persona and wearing makeup. And Jane was describing this one of the reasons why she doesn't wear makeup. But Jane, before you tell us why you don't wear makeup, Jane, if you look at her videos and stuff, I want to just tell you, you have style. Like you have insane amount of style, from all the jewelry you make out of little miniature Etch-a-Sketches to your color palette of the clothes you wear and the outfits. Do you design your own outfits? Because some of your outfits are just out of this world. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that more. So a lot of my personal style comes from inspiration from a lot of places. Now, I grew up primarily getting my clothes from thrift stores. So I never my entire life was wearing what like all the other kids in the classroom were wearing necessarily. And there was absolutely a point, like a time in my life where I felt embarrassment about that because there was pressure. It was actually interesting when I was growing up from first to fourth grade, well, kindergarten to fourth grade. I was living in I would say like a lower class school district. And then I moved in with my mom in fourth grade, and she lived in more of like an upper middle class area. And that was the first time in my life that I felt pressure to conform more to my style, because
This
I
was
noticed
in Michigan, right? It was still in Michigan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I grew up in the Metro Detroit area.
Okay.
And so when I switched school districts in fourth grade, that's when I recognized that like kids were actually wearing clothes that came from nice malls. And like I started seeing like branding on clothes for the first time in my life. And there was absolutely a period where I felt like lesser than, and like I was supposed to be embarrassed about not conforming or wearing what, you know, the cool kids were wearing.
Right.
And then there was a chunk of my life where I was just, clothes were completely 100% utilitarian. And then around high school / college, I started like really wanting to use clothes as a fun means to express myself, and they make me happy. So a lot of my clothes, like I said, I get them from thrift stores. I'm really into fashion trends from Japan. So there's
Yeah, I could see that.
yeah, there's a lot of fantastic communities online where there are people who are really passionate about and dedicated to different subsets of Japanese fashion. And while I don't necessarily feel like I fit like nicely into a specific like Japanese fashion style, I'm definitely influenced by it. And I've been to Japan twice. I've gotten a fair amount of clothes from Japanese brands, and I am very fortunate and privileged in that I am small And so therefore I can actually shop at a lot of kids sections. And honestly, I think kids have way more interesting and fun clothes than most adults do. So some of my clothes are straight up meant for like older children. And I know that it
Right.
works great with my career path as an Etch-a-Sketch artist because I'm in a very kid-friendly career path. But the way I see it, you know, my personal philosophy on fashion and clothing in general is I was once approached by a colleague of mine who I've worked with professionally before, who asked me point blank. He said, "Listen, I've known you for years now. Why do you wear these outfits?" And he didn't mean it offensively. He just wanted to
Mhm.
know, like, well, why do you do it? And I said, "Well, okay. When a woman gets married, many women they spend their whole life fantasizing about their wedding dress. They spend their whole life, you know, picturing exactly how it's going to look and waiting for that big day where they get to wear this beautiful dress and everyone celebrates it. And my philosophy is like, why not just wear something that makes you like sublimely happy every day?
Right.
Because this absolutely has a positive impact on my mental health. And clothes have power. Like
Mhm.
what you choose to put on your body has an absolute impact on the way that the world around you perceives you. Like just yesterday, I went out, my boyfriend and I went out to a diner and I was wearing these like crazy pink shoes with bows on them. I had over a dozen people approach me while I was sitting in my booth to compliment my shoes. Like this just like it's so nice when you just wear something that you're really happy with and passionate about and that makes you happy and then it makes other people in the world happy too. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
you have zero of the crazy California bag lady look where they'll wear like crazy stuff, but they look like they just, it was an accident. You have this way of, you've developed a persona,
Yeah.
and so you can look at all the Princess Etch pictures on the internet or everyone's, it's always different outfits, but it's kind of like you've embraced popular culture. And you kind of have an olive oil kind of physique in a sense, where you can pull off this kind of cartoon, really long, beautiful woman, haute couture kind of aesthetic in a sense. But push it out. You push it out with the primary colors, with the Etch-a-Sketch reds, and you make it kind of art. So you kind of, and I was thinking of Salvador Dali as an example of someone who showed that artists can live a very big life with capes and funny hats and
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
big
he's a great example.
yeah, he's a great example
Yeah.
of that, of artists as showmen. And I think that we don't have much money as artists, so it's a really good way of branding ourselves, right? When you go outside, look the part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it really is kind of a built-in elevator pitch in a way. I'm literally wearing my Etch-a-Sketch necklace almost every day. People
That's
will
right.
straight up approach me and say, "Wow, where'd you get that necklace?" And it becomes the most organic possible way to begin a dialogue about, where did you get that? Why do you have it? Like, it's like people just go up to me and ask me straight up. And it's wonderful. And what's so nice about it for me personally is that it's 100% organic. Like this I'm not doing for anyone else but myself. This is something that I'm already passionate about, is just wearing the silly stuff and embracing the concept of silly
Well,
wholeheartedly.
what you've done is you brought into, this is my theory, I just came up with it. You brought it, you living in real life, what we're seeing hundreds of millions or tens of millions of kids are doing online with their avatars and their memes, and they're living vicariously through people like on, what's the big shooter video game they're all playing right now?
There's always some kind of game like that out there.
Yeah.
There's like Call of Duty and such, and
I'm
Halo
thinking,
and all that.
yeah, I'm thinking of the one that, anyways, but they all have, oftentimes have their own avatars they create.
Sure.
And they can be
Yeah.
and so kids so that's proof of the pudding that kids really want to be kind of a mimi kind of cartoon, right? But
Yeah.
then they're put into the mill of the schools and society, and they homogenize. They look like each other, okay, because they have to buy the
Sure.
right brand. But I think what you're doing is pointing to the fact that I think most young people yearn to live a life that they can create, that they can have their own outfit, their own image. And I'll give you another example. I think that we don't bat an eye when we see the Avengers, and we expect them to be wearing their uniforms, their capes and their robotic, whatever. Even Black Widow, she's got to have her spandex and looking like Black Widow. And I think we love that about our heroes, and we yearn to be heroes. So the theory goes, you're kind of embracing the hero of your
Sure.
persona, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I do sometimes kind of like see my clothes as almost a costume of sorts. I do feel like a cartoon character, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
but that's
great.
good. That's powerful. That's
it is empowering. Yeah, I have so much fun. Like, there are definitely my days where I stay in pajamas all day or whatever. And for me, like, the bane of my life is jeans, blue jeans. Like, I have them in my closet, but I wear them on my off days where I'm just like just not having a great day. I do everything in my power to avoid having blue jeans in my ensembles.
Yeah, well, who I'm envious of is, and my wife won't let me dress the way I want to dress, but maybe one day I will. But I like the Ghostbusters. I'm like, I just want an outfit like that. Cool. Just one. Einstein had one suit. He had clones, but he had like one kind of suit he wore all the time. And I'd envy that because it was very utilitarian, and he was known by the suit he wore. But just like. And we talked about WGN. You probably don't remember Ray Rayner. He was on GN back in this before your time. But he wore this kind of like onesie kind of suit, like a utility suit, like a military utility. It was orange, and he kept little pieces of paper all over his body. And before the Post-it notes, this was a morning show, and he'd take a piece of paper off his outfit. And he'd say, "Hey, how about a cartoon?" And it was a Warner Brothers cartoon. Right.
Oh, cool.
But I was like, so I just think that outfits and uniforms are really cool. And I think that we just don't give ourselves permission to stylize ourselves. And you've given yourself permission in a big way to stylize yourself. And I think that people see it and they value it. I wish there was more of it.
Yeah. I agree too. I mean, I have a lot of people approach me and say like, oh, I wish I could wear something like that. And I think everyone can. I don't think anyone needs permission to wear what they love, and I know I come from like a place of privilege because people do assume that it's easier for me to do it because I'm young or because I might like fit social expectations of like standards of beauty in the US and such. Like, I do think that people think that like if you're physically attractive, that you have more freedom when it comes to wearing like whatever you want to wear. But I don't believe that. I think that like everyone can be beautiful wearing whatever they choose to wear. However they want to express themselves.
I don't mean to sound off color, but I think you see more of this in Black culture with hip hop, in poor culture, not poor poverty. I mean poor money wise. Like they tend to say, you know what, I'm gonna look good, and what I say is I'm gonna say what looks good, and I'm gonna make my hair like this, my clothes like this. And you see a lot of, I think in the hip hop culture, you see a lot of creativity, a lot of idiosyncratic creativity, not just wearing bling and Nike. That's not what I mean. I mean, like, you'll see outfits that are out of this world, that have been designed. And I love that. And I think it's one of the reasons why people love hip hop culture is there's that freedom to express that a lot of people don't give themselves permission to do.
Sure. And I mean, and hip hop culture is especially about being, avant-garde and against the grain and everything too. Any kind of artistic movement usually breeds innovation, in all sorts of visual and, musical ways. So I think that, that was one nice thing about, when I was in art school, I met people who wore all kinds of amazing, fancy, fun, awesome things that were people who just decided to extend their creativity to their, to their physical appearance as well.
Right.
And I do think that like, it is interesting. You see like people, I'll say the more rich people become, often the more homogenous their styles become, because there becomes an increased social expectation of wearing specific brands, abiding by certain standards and trends in fashion. And it's like keeping up with the Joneses, like people care more about that the more money they have.
And it might be a creature of the age of the wealth too. I think we were talking about this yesterday with a guy from Arkansas, and he said in the South, when there's any new money goes right into your car and your outfit. It doesn't go into improving your house. Wow. You can be living in a trailer, but you've got a Lincoln outside, a Lincoln, a four-door, big, beautiful $80,000 Lincoln. You'll get that before you'll get the house. And but I think old money, you wouldn't know it by looking at them, because they're wearing old deck shoes, and they look comfortable. And I'm being cliche, or I'm being stereotypical, I think. But I think you see that when people become more easy with their money, they're not trying to show off as much, right? And they might get
they're more comfortable in it.
Yeah, because it's not what it was about. But and I think that, of course, we're talking about superficial things about clothing, but it's not always superficial, because it is a bit for even people who think it's not a badge. You're pointing out, especially when kids are younger, but even adults, it is a badge of wealth and status. And you're saying, is that what your life is really about? Is it about wealth and status and the perceived wealth and status of other people on you, not really about who you think you are, right? So it's superficial, but is it really? What kind of window dressing are you using in your life?
Yeah, and especially in the age of social media, I mean, this kind of ties well into how that's affected my career. It's funny, I feel so silly because most of the conversation so far has been about fashion, but that is actually an important aspect of my career as an Etch-a-Sketch artist because I'm especially in the last year or so, I joined TikTok like beginning of pandemic. And since then, I have been much more in front of the camera. I've been recording videos like so much more than pre-2020. And the thing about being in front of the camera is that suddenly I'm not just some art making robot that creates art and just spits it out onto the internet. Suddenly I'm a human being with a personality and with a backstory and with a history. And in every video on TikTok, especially, I'm wearing a crazy different outfit. And usually that like starts all sorts of interesting dialogues with people because it's almost like a litmus test. I consider my outfits to be a wonderful way to weed out the people in my life that I don't want in my life anyways. If there's somebody who does not like what I wear, then they're entitled to their own opinion, but I don't want them in my life anyways, because if they don't get it and if they're offended by, the fact that I wear whatever I'm wearing, or if, they have some sort of like really negative perspective on like trying to police the way that I present myself, then it's like, well, these are the kind of people that I'm not interested in having be a part of my life anyways. So you just saved me the time by making yourself apparent to me that you're not interested in my life. So
right. And we'll get back to this now. It's not weird for weird's sake. You basically your fashion taste relates to your art, especially your art as an Etch-a-Sketch artist, because your favorite color is that primary kind of blue, red. And these colors, I'd say primary colors, but they're kind of high tone, pure colors, really have an impactful childlike kind of sensibility to them. And I think they exude fun, from the beads and the Etch-a-Sketch to all the things you wear, the big shoes. It's kind of a cartoonish, fun, childlike wonder and vulnerability too. I mean, there's a kind of vulnerability to it. And I think that, and there's how much vulnerable can you get than being a freaking Etch-a-Sketch artist? You're putting yourself out there, right?
Yeah, it's funny because for me, I'm so used to wearing all of these crazy things, and I often forget. As soon as I leave the house, I'll forget what I'm wearing because I'm so comfortable in this stuff. But it'll become apparent to me if I'm in the company of other people. Like other people will approach me, or I'll be with friends and maybe they're a little bit more like self-conscious about it because they'll recognize that I'm like wearing something crazy or whatever. So it's like, it's definitely something that like I'm used to, but you're right, there is a vulnerability to it because I'm opening myself up to the criticism of the world by choosing to wear something.
We have a weird place in the world right now where we're supposed to blend in but look hot.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, and I don't know what that means, but it seems like that's where we are, where we don't want to be too far from the herd, but we want to be the hottest one in the herd if we can pull that off.
It's absolutely a lot easier to blend in. Like I have plenty of outfits that are just basic every day, and like sometimes it's like my social battery is low. It is so much easier to just grab the pair of jeans and a random long sleeve shirt and exit the house, like
that's what I did.
Yeah. And it's like, I get it. Like, I don't fault anyone for making that choice. Like, I think we all need to make that choice now and then.
Yeah. Well, were you aware of the normcore movement? Were you aware of that one?
What is normcore? I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, maybe it's normcore, I think, was kind of a reaction against fashion. And it was basically wearing clothes that had no label. They were a little more utilitarian, and I think it was kind of about blending in, but it was about not caring so much, which is a kind of, in my sense, I think it's kind of self-conscious too. You care that you don't care, you know what I mean? So it's hard to avoid this whole thing. But like I said, I love to wear just the uniform of the Ghostbusters because I just think it's fun to wear something that's what you're about. Not that I'm a Ghostbuster, but so tell us more about what it's like to be one of the, if you Google it, you're on the top of the heap now. A very well-known, established Etch-a-Sketch artist. What is that like? What is your life like?
Oh man. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like right now it's really hard for me to like put a true indicator on it because the world is just now opening up. In the last year and a half, my life has changed significantly from an online perspective. Like before 2020, most of my like I would say social media presence has been pretty unknown. Like I've had very small followings on social media, and then I've like blown up in the last year and a half. Like
I
my
noticed.
subscriber counts have just skyrocketed. And suddenly things will happen, like I'll join a live stream for someone else and somebody in the live stream will recognize my username and start freaking out. And that's new strange territory for me. It's really cool. It's really nice. I've been, I bring up the internet a lot because the internet has such an importance to my career as an Etch-a-Sketch artist. I firmly believe that my career path would not be possible if it wasn't for the internet. Um, but it's nice because I've been sharing my art online since 2007. I've been Etch-a-Sketching now since I was just a young child. Like I was like age 4. I'm 29 now. So I literally have 25 years of Etch-a-Sketching experience. But half of that time I've been chronicling my experience online. And so it feels weird to suddenly get recognition for it in a lot of ways, by fostering these like these large and growing audiences, because before then I was so used to running a live stream and getting like 7 people in the chat, and that was fine, but I was always wondering, like, will anything ever like grow from that? And on top of that, one thing that I do find really encouraging, and maybe this is something like other artists might find encouraging as well, before my like online audiences blew up, I still had the fortune of working with an incredible amount of like high profile clients. Like I've worked with Disney, MTV, Cartoon Network, Callaway Golf. I always thought that was an interesting one. And these are all companies that found me because I was working in this very specific niche, despite the fact that I didn't necessarily have, a high degree of like internet fame, I'll say. So as far as, how I feel about being an Etch-a-Sketch artist that's like kind of up there near the top of the crop, I guess, it's a constant hustle and it's so much fun. And the one of the downsides, I would say it's an upside and a downside. The Etch-a-Sketch artist community is very small and we all know each other. And it's really great because I've had some wonderful friendships form from my friends in the Etch-a-Sketch artist community, but it's not great when there's a really cool work opportunity that pops up and you know that if you don't get the gig, one of your friends got the gig. And it gets more complicated when you start making Etch-a-Sketch your livelihood, because you've got these friendships that end up being technically friendships with competitors. Now, I believe there's plenty enough room for all of us. It's a very small niche in a very big world. So I think, it's great, but
it's not there. Yeah. But, there is style, and you could even have style in an Etch-a-Sketch, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's another thing. I've learned to change my focus from, trying to fight for the gigs that might be an opportunity that they might, just plaster out to every Etch-a-Sketch artist, and instead working on, convincing people to work with me specifically for, the specific attributes that I bring to the table. And that's really helped me just from a marketing perspective as an artist. Like you could technically hire any Etch-a-Sketch artist to create a drawing on an Etch-a-Sketch, but if you hire me, then you're going to get X, Y, and Z, and you're going to get this many years experience with this or that. And, definitely. And you're right that it's funny. You can absolutely tell once you get involved in the Etch-a-Sketch artist community, you could tell who made what just by looking at it, because we all do have a specific style.
Well, the one guy that's on the Etch-a-Sketch homepage It's he has a Russian name, I think, Vasak or something like that.
Oh, yes, George. Yes.
Yeah, and his style is very linear. Like he has like hash marks. He uses the Etch-a-Sketch. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, I can hear you.
Yeah, he uses hash marks, very in a very like the horizontal ones especially, which I think are probably really easy to do for shading. And he's big in making jersey. He does a lot of jersey art. I look at his website. He's a graphic artist, but I was like, watch, he is so different than Jane's artwork.
Oh yeah, I mean we are definitely, especially because he works more with like sports related art. But he's done a lot of celebrities on Etch-a-Sketch. His work is primarily focused on portraiture. But you're totally right. Like it's ironic. We both work in the same medium, but we're so different in what we do. And so you're right. Like sometimes he might be the best person for the job if they're looking for someone to do something specifically like what he does. Also, it's worth noting that his renditions can take up to like 80 hours or something. So he's offering a different degree of detail and, the amount of time he clocks into a project, whereas like, his work might be perfect for a very specific task that requires a high degree of detail. It might make more sense to hire a different Etch-a-Sketch artist if you've got a 2-day turnaround, like stuff like that. Yeah. So it's definitely been good for me to figure out like what attributes I offer specifically, and not trying to necessarily please everyone, not trying to cater to everything.
Question for you. I noticed that you're a collector of Etch-a-Sketches, and I didn't realize there were so many freaking Etch-a-Sketch designs out there. So do your clients say, could you put mine on a cloud Etch-a-Sketch that's white and pink or something? Like, do you offer the platforms too of what you're drawing on?
So it's a case-by-case basis. Typically when it comes to commissioned work, I offer the standard Etch-a-Sketches. Traditionally, people most identify with a classic red Etch-a-Sketch, so that's the easiest for me to offer. But I do offer on a case-by-case scenario, like premium services, where I might specifically scout for a very specific Etch-a-Sketch canvas that they might be interested in having me create the art on. It is pretty rare, though, for me to create commissioned art on anything but the classic red frames.
Okay.
I do like to offer it, but as a collector, yes, you're correct. Etch-a-Sketch has been around now for around 61 years. About a week from now will be Etch-a-Sketch Day, so it'll be the 61st anniversary. And in those 61 years, I cannot count the number of different iterations of the toy that has been released, and that's just counting within the US. There are other like regional equivalents of the Etch-a-Sketch. And as like an Etch-a-Sketch collector enthusiast, I've endeavored to try to get Etch-a-Sketches from like pretty much every region where they've been released. Where it's like basically the same concept of an Etch-a-Sketch, but not necessarily under the same brand name. But yeah, I do really enjoy the projects where I work with clients who decide that they want a very specific canvas for me to work on. But that can have its own degree of occupational hazards because every Etch-a-Sketch is a unique canvas. And so you might find that if somebody wants me to work on like a very specific one that was only released during a certain era or is a very specific color of the frame, it might be that like I might only have one in my personal stock and I can't find one available for sale online. Like I often go to eBay to buy them used, but when you're buying used Etch-a-Sketches, it's buying a used canvas. So you don't know what condition it's really going to be in until you inspect it. And so, that's another reason why I try not to, I don't advertise that I offer that as a service, but when people inquire, I'm willing to start those dialogues, but it comes with a lot of asterisks.
So you might get somebody who say, I'd love you to do a portrait of my family on my grandma's Etch-a-Sketch. They might offer their old Etch-a-Sketch.
That has happened. I've done, I think, 1 or 2 projects like that. And I've always had to explain to the client that, I'm willing to work on this canvas, but you have to understand that it may not be in the best functioning condition. So that might come with some occupational hazards, like, for example, some of the older Etch-a-Sketches that have been manufactured in the 1960s, they might have been so well used that, the knobs have yellowed on them over time, or they're a little dinged up, or the stylus doesn't connect as well with the glass as it used to. And so
Right.
it produces a much lighter line than it might have when you purchased it in 1960. And these are all things that I have to like explain, like might be, they may not produce the exact rendition as they envision. And oftentimes I have to charge more, not only for, the service of like providing a unique canvas to work on, but also because it might take me 3 times as long to produce the darkness of line that I want, as if I were, if I were instead using a better
new one.
mechanically
Yeah.
functioning one.
Right.
Exactly. So those are things I'm willing to work with, but most people at the end of the day, they might like the novelty of me using like a sentimental Etch-a-Sketch. But then when I start getting into the technical aspects of it, they might realize like, well, maybe it's a little beyond my price range, or it's just not worth the extra trouble.
Okay.
So I do my best to vet my canvases before I work on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even now, I can usually a seasoned Etch-a-Sketch artist can often identify the era of when an Etch-a-Sketch might have been manufactured, because over different periods of time there have been different mechanical nuances in them, or even mechanical problems. Like there was a period around like 2015, 2014 where like every classic Etch-a-Sketch, or like the large canvas, like every classic Etch-a-Sketch had a horrific problem with not properly erasing. So you would shake it and the aluminum powder would just like fall off the screen instead of sticking to it. And it was an issue with moisture being captured inside of the toy that it wasn't supposed to be. And they've since fixed that problem. That's, definitely don't want to knock the company that produces Etch-a-Sketch. But there are things that like I have to be aware of when I'm purchasing Etch-a-Sketch, because I might buy them in bulk. And I have to recognize that not every canvas is going to be 100% perfect to work on for every single project, but some canvases might be better for certain tasks than others. So there's also a beauty to having a variety of different kinds of mechanical nuances to work with. Some
Yeah.
have a thicker stylus, some erase fantastically, some might erase only a little, but that could have benefit if you're layering things up by erasing and then adding layers on top. So
Right.
yeah,
Well,
definitely.
for the audience that didn't have the joy, as I did as a kid, of breaking my own Etch-a-Sketch and seeing all the beautiful aluminum powder get everywhere, let's talk a little about Andre Cassan's and his La Caran Magique. You want to talk about how he came up with the Etch-a-Sketch?
Sure. So, Andre Cassan, and I'll never know how to say his name properly since it's French. I'll apologize for that. Je suis désolé. So he was an electrician in France, and he was tinkering around with some aluminum in the factory. And he noticed that when the aluminum was like coated onto glass, he could take his finger and he could kind of like wipe it around, and it would, where he wiped the glass with his finger, it would create this nice, clean region, and the powder wouldn't like repopulate onto that cleaned region.
Right.
And the reason why the aluminum powder sticks to the glass, first off, it sticks to everything. As you mentioned, you opened an Etch-a-Sketch. I'm so sorry for you. Those things are so messy. But that aluminum powder remains stuck to the screen despite the fact that it's I'll give a very brief explanation of how an Etch-a-Sketch works. Basically, inside of an Etch-a-Sketch, there is a box, a sealed box, and on one part of the box is the glass screen that faces the person as they draw. And there is a stylus inside that is hooked up to a series of pulleys that attach to the knobs. And the stylus is interacted by a horizontal and a vertical bar, which basically serve as like the X and Y axis. So what you're doing, it's known as a plotter. You're basically plotting coordinates on an invisible grid on the Etch-a-Sketch screen by turning the left knob to make it go horizontal and the right knob to go vertical.
Right.
And to erase the drawing, you shake the Etch-a-Sketch, and there's aluminum powder inside that recoats the screen. And the word, so the etch and Etch-a-Sketch comes from the stylus inside of the unit scraping the powder off the screen. And what you're seeing inside, when you see the darkness on the screen when you're making these lines, it's actually viewing the inside of the Etch-a-Sketch. So circling back to Andre Casson, he was experimenting with this and realized there might be some sort of creative potential in it. And so he started tinkering around, and he created a box to hold this powder in because he realized that he could shake it and recoat the screen nice and evenly. And it stays clung to the screen with like an electrostatic charge. So it's a very sensitive environment that lives inside of an Etch-a-Sketch. It's like a very delicate ecosystem. It's a surprisingly complex toy for how simplistic and intuitive it is. But he tinkered with it a whole bunch and eventually created a prototype. And the prototype used a joystick in lieu of two knobs. And the joystick was hooked up to a stylus inside of this box that he was able to, operate the joystick, and then it would interact directly with the stylus on the screen to create these lines, and then he could shake it up. And so he eventually presented that, I believe it was in 1959, to the Nuremberg Toy Fair in Germany. And a bunch of people passed up on it. And then a company called the Ohio Art Company witnessed this contraption, saw some interesting, possibilities in it. And I believe that they bought the patent for it, or the licensing at least, for $25,000, which was a pretty big sum at the time for 1959. And then they began manufacturing the product after making some pretty major cosmetic changes to it, changing out the joystick element and then replacing it with two separate knobs. And then they debuted it in 1960, July 12th, 1960, is the first day Etch-a-Sketch was put on store shelves. And the toy ended up being a major success for quite a few reasons. One thing that was very smart for Ohio Art to do is that they, when they redesigned the cosmetic appearance of the Etch-a-Sketch and added these two knobs, it was very reminiscent of a television and just its basic cosmetic appearance. And it was also advertised in commercials on TV. I'm not sure if it's the very first or one of the first toys to ever be advertised in a commercial. But given that it had this, this appearance of a television screen, which back in the 1960s, TVs were very expensive, and they were quite a commodity to have. So it was kind of an aspirational thing for kids to have TVs of their own. There's an
irony that the TV itself was a tube with powder on the inside of it.
Yeah,
Weird,
it really, it was a beautiful choice for Ohio Art to really design it in that way. And then the knobs, are reminiscent of the older TVs, which use the knobs to change the channels. And it was, truly a fantastic marriage of subject matter and medium for the way they advertised it and everything. And then it ended up being like the biggest toy of 1960. They were the factory in Ohio Art in Bryan, Ohio. They were manufacturing Etch-a-Sketch until like deep into Christmas Eve. I think they closed manufacturing at like 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve or something to get all these Etch-a-Sketches out in time for the holidays. So it ended up being a breakout hit. And for the first 56 years of the toys, ownership by the Ohio Art Company, it was their flagship toy. Ohio Art went on to produce many other toys before and after Etch-a-Sketch. They have a long-standing history. Right. But that always was their number one flagship toy during that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a kind of a baby boomer myself. I'm a very young, old Gen Xer baby boomer. My dad was a World War II vet, so I had a kind of baby boomer experience as a kid. Sure. My dad was born in 1919. But I remember the toy. I played with it a lot. Probably my parents thought I was obsessive compulsive with it because I would just make that. It looked like a plane up in the sky, the contrail of a plane. You know what I mean? So I would obsess on that little stylus going through that gray cloud, that gray film. And I remember the time I discovered that if you make it a dark enough, thick enough line, you'll see the inside of the machine. And we were blown away by that because we didn't have video, we didn't have YouTube to know that would happen, right? So what is that inside of it, right? But I want to talk a little bit about the mechanical operation of this thing in terms of the experience of a kid and how it affects the kid's life. Because of course I'm a toy maker and I'm really into the idea of kids and how they experience toys. And I discovered you actually through, I forget her name, Cheryl maybe, the woman who runs the Toy Association in Chicago.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well,
That's-
there's Mary. Mary is the she runs the
Mary.
Chicago Toy and Game Fair. Yeah.
Mary. It was Mary. Mary on LinkedIn. She said something about you, and I was like, "Who is that?" Jane.
Yeah, Mary's great. I love
Yeah,
Mary.
it was Mary. So I learned about you through the Toy Association and Chi Tag. I think it's called Chi Tag in Chicago.
Yep.
Yeah. So, anyways, it's an interesting thing because it is a plotter, and plotters are still used by people. They computer drawing uses plotters, right?
Absolutely.
And a
Yeah.
3D printer is essentially a plotter with a Z-axis, so the bed might go down, but it's still plotting a piece of plastic, extruded plastic. So we're using these things more than ever before. Mechanical, computerized plotters, right?
Absolutely.
But they had the brilliance to put the knobs in a kid's hand. And one thing our bodies don't like doing so much is we have these, like, we make them, these, our fingers, like you were talking about before, fingers are, revolute joints, right? The knobs of your fingers.
Yeah.
There's these hinged joints that go one direction, but we don't have many knob functions on our body. We have two bones in our hand that kind of will make a rotational motion like that, but it's kind of an alien thing to have a rotary motion. So I find that it's an interesting problem. When you give a kid an Etch-a-Sketch, you're kind of giving them a person with arms prosthetics, right? I mean, they could grab a pencil or a crayon and scribble all day long, but you're saying instead of scribbling with a crayon and making those beautiful little organic lines, I'm going to give you this, and it's a prosthetic device. So you have to interpret that machine to make the lines you normally do with a crayon. And I find it to be a very brilliant problem for a kid to have because, of course, I scribbled a million times with the Etch-a-Sketch. You do this, right? And you scribble.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But to make, like you said, to make the perfect circle, it seems like the moonshot. It seems like an impossibility. So I'm intrigued by what it does to the child's brain, how it works with their dexterity of using their digits in a very alien procedure. But they understand the outcome should be a drawing. So it's forcing them into like this box, but I don't mean it in a negative way. It's not a negative thing. You want to expand on my thought here, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's like 20 directions I could go with it. There's, oh my gosh, where to begin? Well, okay. I think it's worth stating like when I picked up an Etch-a-Sketch, chronologically speaking. So I started Etch-a-Sketching around 1995, 96. And I was not exposed to the internet until around 06, 07. I was a little bit of a late adapter. And I think that's worth noting because I did not know that when I was a kid, no one told me what is possible to be done on an Etch-a-Sketch. No one told me that it's possible to create drawings on the toy. Nobody told me that it's impossible to create drawings on the toy. And I feel like it would have been more likely to have been told the latter. And I think that's worth noting because sometimes I wonder if when I was a child, if someone would have approached me and told me like, all you can do is staircases and boxes on that, there's nothing else you could do. I almost wonder if I would have just stopped at that because like kids are often given all kinds of limitations by adults and authoritarian figures, and they just, stick with those and don't think to necessarily challenge them. So, when I was first playing with an Etch-a-Sketch, there was no expectation for what would come out of it for me. But there was no roadmap. There was no curriculum or there was no path to learning how to become a good Etch-a-Sketch artist. Whereas I think today there are resources available thanks to the internet where if somebody wanted to get into Etch-a-Sketch, they could reach out to someone like me or another Etch-a-Sketch artist. They could Google Etch-a-Sketch art and see immediately what is capable of being created on the medium. So it's kind of an interesting place for a new person to enter into the arena now, to see what can be done, because everyone who comes from, the 90s and backwards, there was really no way to know that this is something that was capable of being done. Yeah, that's kind of just a little aside. Now, as far as things that you learn as a kid, there are certain artistic mediums that require you to use both hands, but I feel like Etch-a-Sketch is the only one that is like a two-dimensional medium. When I think of like skills that require both hands, I usually think of things like pottery and more constructive things, and your non-dominant hand usually assists more as like the aid than like the primary creation.
It holds the paper down. or whatever.
Yeah, it'll hold the paper down, it'll steady you.
Hold the palette, whatever it is. Yeah.
It assists you in your task, but it's not an equal contributor. Whereas with Etch-a-Sketch, the left hand is required for all horizontal movement of the stylus, and the right hand is required for all vertical movement, and they have to work together simultaneously and usually equally if you want to create things like diagonals, etc. So I think that that is a unique skill set. Now, I would argue there are other things that kids can use, especially today, that are more technologically focused that help with this kind of ambidextrous like hand-eye coordination. You've got video games, you've got typing, things like that. But Etch-a-Sketch is so delightfully analog. There is no one word that I've heard used for it as like a marketing kind of thing that I think is fantastic is people consider Etch-a-Sketch to be positive screen time. Right? Like you're spending time in front of this extremely analog gray scale screen. Like when you think of cartoons and such, it's usually like, it's funny because my outfits are usually like cartoons and such. They're very bright popping colors. Like it's like designed to capture your attention. Whereas an Etch-a-Sketch is just about as unassuming as it can get as a toy. The frame might be a bright red, but the screen is a very basic gray. And the only thing you can make on it is darker gray lines that can, turn into black. And it doesn't whistle, it doesn't sing, it doesn't have lights that, it doesn't have any kind of bell or whistle designed to further capture a child's attention. And yet a kid will see an Etch-a-Sketch, go right up to it. And I've seen this happen literally around the world. I've had the opportunity to travel all over the place thanks to Etch-a-Sketch. People who have never seen an Etch-a-Sketch at any point in their lives intuitively approach it and go right for the knobs and start trying to interact with them. Something about it is so delightfully intuitive and simple that it's so approachable for people to just walk right up to it and just understand intrinsically that when they turn those knobs, that something's about to happen. I love that.
Yeah, and you get by default, you're going to be on that Tron maze, the motorcycle maze, where you're guaranteed to have those beautiful vertical and horizontal lines. Guaranteed. Like you can't mess that one up. So there's that beautiful doodle kind of Zen zone you can go into, right?
Yeah, and it's very therapeutic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But if you want to, you could allow yourself to become frustrated with those horizontal and vertical lines and then try to jump off the Tron maze and see what you can do. And at first it's really ugly and very dissatisfying because you don't know how to control it. But it's like anything else. You get a simple instrument like a recorder or those little tiny pianos, and there's only so much you can do, but you have a lot of fun with them too, right? But you give a kid 88 keys, and they could, right? My point is, eventually the kid might get frustrated with just horizontals, verticals, and want to move off. And like 10,000 hours later, you're making little Mona Lisas and little Bob Ross portraits and things. So,
and it definitely was a learning curve. Now, one thing that I like to say during live streams is that I believe everyone can learn how to Etch-a-Sketch. I teach workshops as part of my many things I do to pay the bills as an Etch-a-Sketch artist. And it's funny how even 1 hour of lessons can unlock skills that people didn't realize they ever had with Etch-a-Sketch. But honestly, I feel like if people just pick one up and tinker with it and spend some time just experimenting and just having no pressure on themselves, you could really end up unlocking skill sets, and you do get to a point where it becomes muscle memory. For me, I do not think about it at all. It is so intuitive for me to get the stylus to interact exactly how I want it to, that it requires no extra analytical thought to get to that point. It's actually harder for me personally to explain how to do something like how to Etch-a-Sketch a circle than it is for me to just demonstrate it right on the fly.
It's funny. I just bought a Apple Pencil for my iPad.
Yeah.
And oh my God, it was like a birthday present to myself. It was actually a Father's Day present, but I love it so much. I had a Wacom tablet where it was the older Wacom tablets where you're drawing on a black tab and you have to look up at the screen and see what you're drawing. And I hated that process so much because I hated the disconnect. And I would said, you know what? I'm never going to get used to this. I hate it. But with the Apple Pencil, if you buy those, all you do is you sync it with your iPad and you could draw right on the screen, and I'm in heaven. So I understand, but I understand what you're saying is your brain, you trained your brain to basically not even think about this knob does this, does that, and you make an elliptical line, for instance, right? It just, that's, it's like using a violin or anything else. You just learn how to make a note. You don't really know what your hand did, but that's how you make a beautiful solid tone, right?
Absolutely.
Very
Absolutely.
interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. And one lesson that I think, as far as creative toys, I can't think of another toy that has accomplished this. Etch-a-Sketch teaches you how to let go, because it's got this built-in mechanism where you shake and erase it. And that was a lesson that was hard for me to learn as a kid, because like you said earlier, I think before we were recording,
Right.
we have this habit where we want to be precious with our stuff. And it's hard as an artist to make something you're really proud of and then let it go.
Right.
And Etch-a-Sketch forces you to do that unless you go buy another Etch-a-Sketch. So, there were drawings that I would have that might have taken me hours as a kid that I was really proud of, and they might live on that Etch-a-Sketch for weeks because I just can't bear to part with it. But eventually, my urge to play with the Etch-a-Sketch again would grow so much that it would trump my desire to keep the drawing, and I'd eventually shake it away. And it's one of those things where, like, I can look back now, 20 years later, and see that, oh, wow, it's a good thing I did that, because I could look at that drawing that, if I were to see that drawing I made 20 years ago, I'd be like, oh, that drawing's terrible, because we, as artists, grow by creating more. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to look back on. And there is no record of my art for like the first half of my life, because this was before. Yeah, and it was Etch-a-Sketch, and also this was before digital cameras were really around or
Right.
accessible to the general public. I don't even think I have any photos from, like, you wouldn't waste a picture on a disposable camera if you weren't confident that the conditions to take the photo were good. And like, if you use the flash on a disposable camera on an Etch-a-Sketch screen, it's just gonna flash right back at you. So,
Right.
so I never thought to take a picture with a disposable camera, because every photo was precious. So. Yeah.
I remember, well, that's the thing. And I would suggest to parents, buy lots of paper, buy the big reams of paper, buy lots of paper for your kids, because there was always a big thing in my family where I needed more paper. I always wanted more paper. I was drawing on everything. But back to Etch-a-Sketch, I remember I draw like a submarine, like the Nautilus, if I was watching 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I draw the Nautilus, right? The beautiful submarine.
Yeah.
But then for me as a kid, as a boy especially, it wasn't just fun to make the drawing of the Nautilus. I had to show the water line, and then it getting hit by cannon fire, and then it's sinking. And I have flames coming out of it. So I was like making a whole movie, right? And I always destroyed and that went over to my regular drawings. I draw a tank, then I show the bullet holes in the tank and the smoke coming out of it. So all my drawings ended up a disaster, because I was like making a little movie on my drawing. That's how I rolled as a kid. It was always like a war movie or something, or ships sinking or starships falling apart. Like, it was always a dynamic situation for me.
And that often happened for me too, especially growing up, where I would start with one thing, and it's almost like you couldn't help but add to it and compound upon it. Like, you ended up creating like a little universe on the screen every time you drew something, which is incredible to think about, because the old classic Etch-a-Sketch, the screen size was literally only 5 by 7 inches. And it's incredible to look back and think about just how much you could pack into that tiny little area. Whereas I often feel like it's harder for me to accomplish that on a sheet of paper, which is like double the size. It's crazy to think about how easy it was to accomplish that. And I think part of it had to do with the fact that it was an all or nothing thing. So if you kept adding to it, then you kept having more and more going on, and you couldn't just decide like, okay, well, I'm done with this part of the drawing. I don't want the castle in it anymore. I'm going to erase the castle, and then I'm going to add a house instead. Like, you couldn't do that. You had to just commit to everything you drew, and then you could add to it. You could further to the narrative if you wanted, or you could just nuke it and like start from scratch and start a whole new story.
Did Etch-a-Sketch ever take off in schools? Because you would think it'd be a natural thing, since it's not consumable, right? Like, you buy one Etch-a-Sketch and it could last, get a lot of use out of it.
So I have a few things to say about that. The president of the Ohio Art Company, Bill Kilgallen, one of his like brilliant marketing ploys to get Etch-a-Sketch like more well known throughout the US, is he would send Etch-a-Sketches to like doctor's offices and dentist offices because kids were always bored chilling in the waiting room. And it's great. You didn't have to bring out a bunch of sheets of paper and coloring books and crayons that get lost everywhere in the waiting room. You could just have a few Etch-a-Sketches that are these nice, beautifully contained, simple, drawing apparatuses that would keep kids occupied and get them in the zone. And then they stop fidgeting around and getting impatient while they're waiting for their appointment or whatever. And that ended up being really successful for them, doing that, sending them all over the US. But in classrooms, it's a little more complicated because it's the classic case of, well, we have 30 students in our classroom and only one Etch-a-Sketch. And there's always going to be that one kid who starts playing with it and then 3 other kids that want to play with it. And while Etch-a-Sketch was always a rather economical choice for a toy to get for your kid for Christmas or whatever, I think when you start thinking about things like, well, how many do I need for a classroom? Those numbers start getting like really high. So I think that oftentimes teachers would instead go with like generally cheaper drawing supplies to satisfy the whole class, like coloring books and such.
Yeah.
Now, I never had any Etch-a-Sketches in my classrooms growing up.
Neither did I.
Yeah. And it is interesting to think about because I really do think it's such a positive toy. Now, I've talked to plenty of teachers about about Etch-a-Sketch when I'm teaching workshops and such. And they definitely will comment to me like, oh, I'd love to do that. But oftentimes, with the US educational system, a lot of teachers are paying out of their own pockets for a lot of these extra, aspects of their classrooms and such. So it's like outside of a teacher's budget to enrich their students with a bunch of Etch-a-Sketches. Now, every now and then they'll have incredible sales on Etch-a-Sketches where like they might be like $6 for like a large Etch-a-Sketch, which is like a really good deal. And I'll try to post those on my social media. And I remember one time I posted that and a teacher told me, they messaged me and said, I just bought like 15 for my classroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
They're
it's
not,
like,
by
that's
today's
fantastic.
standards, they're not expensive anymore compared to computers and all the things we're giving kids.
Right. And so many teachers and parents are trying to fight the technological presence in their children's lives since it's so ubiquitous now. And it's funny because when I was a kid, the only reason why I got into Etch-a-Sketch is because my grandma wouldn't let me watch TV.
Right.
And so if I had things my way as a kid, I would not be where I am today. Like, I know that.
I want to ask you about that because you seem to me to be a person who I could see being an ER doctor or somebody working at a big ad company. Like I can see you're a very high functioning person with a very large vocabulary who's very well spoken. And we discussed before you went on live on Facebook, you handle lots of the video editing and production of your company now. You do a lot of things. So you're obviously very talented. Besides being an Etch-a-Sketch girl, what were you doing as a kid? I know you spent a lot of time at your grandma's house, your aunt's house. Were you reading books? Like, what kind of girl were you?
Well, I was always drawing. Now I have 4 older siblings, but I didn't necessarily spend too much time with them growing up. My sister Elizabeth, she's the one closest to me in age. She used to read to me a lot. So she used to read a lot of like chapter books and such, and I would draw while she read. I always kind of enjoyed solitude and just sticking to myself. Some of my earliest memories are of either drawing or I had a lot of toys, but they were like random tchotchkes we kept in the house, and I would build towers out of them, and I just kind of kept to myself. I was always like kind of self-occupied. But then when I moved in with my mom, I got to really know the neighborhood, and I went to the park a lot. I played tag, hide and go seek, and I got really into trading cards. So like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, I got really obsessed with that. I became very industrious. I was always hustling. I was always working to, better my trading card game collections because I didn't have, I didn't come from a lot of money. So if I wanted things, I had to figure out innovative ways to get them. So I would do things like my mom would give me a little Debbie snack for my snack time at school, and I would sell them in class so I can make some pocket change to save up for more packs of Pokemon cards. Like I would do those kind of things, and I was hustling cards on the side and making money doing that. And
meanwhile, all your girlfriends are getting fat And you're like the rich skinny girl with the Pokemon.
Yeah, and I'm making money because I'm selling my stuff. and I definitely I was always hustling because I definitely resented coming from less. Especially as a kid, I think it's so easy to compare how much you have to others. Like I remember being so resentful that the other kids in the classroom had a Game Boy and I didn't have a Game Boy. And I wanted one, I wanted one so badly. I dreamed about having one. And so eventually I did get one. That was really cool. But that might've been around the time when I took a break from Etch a Sketch, kind of coincidentally. But, but I guess, growing up, that's how I was. But I also, in school, I was, I always tried to be like top of the honor roll, straight A student. I cared a lot about grades. I definitely wanted to be viewed as like the smart kid. But then I was also the art kid. Those were my two like identifying factors. And those lasted through high school. I did like the AP route. I took all the advanced placement classes. I was actually enrolled in Michigan State University for applied mathematics because I've always had a passion for math, which I think Etch a Sketch, as I've mentioned, is a very mathematical medium to work with.
Right.
And I love math. I've always adored numbers and equations and all that good stuff. And my plan in life was to find some kind of career that was mathematically oriented, some sort of analytical kind of path, even something like I was always fascinated by the prospect of like becoming an accountant or something, which I know sounds pretty boring to a lot of people, but like to me, I'm really into finances and really into like the organization of that. And I'm very fastidious about those kind of things. So that was kind of my plan in life. And then I pulled out last minute to go to art school. So, so I kind of, went in many ways, the opposite direction. Artists are known as being so free flowing and kind of chaotic. Whereas I try to be very like astute and organized in the way that I conduct.
Yeah, but I think that was the 20th century that laid that moniker on, or that reputation on artists. Fair enough, because we had drunkards that were artists and drug addicts and all like rock and roll types. But
chaos has always surrounded art. Yeah.
If you look at 19th century art, even the Impressionists, a lot of them had backup careers: doctors, accountants, business people. So they were. It's nice to see, I think, a person who was an AP student, loves math, really could have gone anywhere, and you decided to become an art major. I wish there were more stories like that, because we have the rap. I think I was an art major too. You went to art school though, of being kind of like, well, if you can't do it, go to art class. Like a lot of posers or a lot of lazy kids or kids who are on drugs, they take art. And it's just like how to coast through high school. And it's a terrible rap for art, because it's not art's fault.
No, it's not. And it's unfortunate that art gets a lot less respect in a lot of ways for some reasons like that. Like, it's funny. I remember when I decided to go to art school, my guidance counselor was just freaking out. Like, what are you doing? Like, your ACT scores do not. Yeah, exactly. What a waste. Yeah. Absolutely. Art was considered the throwaway career. Yeah, like, what, are you crazy? And it was. Yeah, it was definitely a strange, a path less taken for someone with my resume that I had when I graduated from high school. Like I had scholarships to a bunch of places, and then I ended up picking the art school, which was kind of a strange path. And but I do have to say, my skills that I left behind from, my academic path in high school and everything, those have come in handy great, because I'm still passionate about math. I'm still passionate about English. English has helped me with all of the copywriting that I do for all of my all of my social media posts and public speaking, and mathematics is so important for me in calculating the cost of my products and determining what makes sense for me to keep from a financial standpoint in my Etsy shop, and what makes sense for me to stop selling. And I also had the fortune of working at this incredible job after I graduated from art school, where I worked for a photographer in Chicago. I was her assistant, and she had been running a successful business for, at that point, like 10 years. And so I was her assistant. I basically wore like 7 hats, and I got this wonderful firsthand experience of what it's like to run a business in the creative field.
What's
so
your
I
name?
ended up.
You want to tell us your name?
Oh, sure. So I worked at Juki, a portrait boutique. The photographer, she's Jill Liebhaber. She is a family and kids photographer,
Mhm.
but she has a brick and mortar over in Lincoln Square in
Mhm.
Chicago. And it was great because at that time I lived in Albany Park, which is I got to walk to work every day. That was cool. And I mean, I got to assist with marketing plans, and I got to assist with major projects beyond the scope of just working on the photo retouching for the pictures. Like, I got to do the graphic design. I was helping to shape the visual look of the branding and marketing materials for the following seasons, and it taught me a lot about like planning out concrete things and timelines for certain events in advance. Like, we would have to plan things for the holidays. Like, we would have all of our holiday marketing done by August, because we knew that once the holidays hit, that we wouldn't have time to do things. And those are like the kind of like logistical things that I didn't necessarily learn in the classroom at school, but those are things that have like absolutely been instrumental for me in my own business, where I have to think about like, what kind of product offerings am I going to offer for the holidays this year to help bolster my sales? Because I can't just depend on people to just drop into my inbox at any given time. I need to also make sure to like go out there and market my stuff. And so like those are a lot of skills that like don't necessarily connect directly with the creating of art, but are arguably equally, if not more important than creating the art. Like, if there's anything I've learned in the last decade, it's that being a successful artist, unfortunately, often does not have anything to do with making good art. Like, I have so many incredible friends that I went to school with in college, fellow colleagues of mine, who were better artists than me. Like, straight up, they were more skilled draftsmen. They had a better grasp on capturing likenesses. They might have, incredible skill sets in this or that arena, but they don't necessarily have the same skills in marketing their work, or they haven't had the same kind of opportunities that I've had. And so, it's to no fault of their skills as an artist, but they haven't experienced the same degree of success that I have. And when I say success, I mean more from like a financial self-sustaining standpoint. Um, they haven't had that same kind of success because they may not necessarily have the same degree of skills in these other areas that have nothing to do with making art. And so while my school was incredible at training us to be skilled draftsmen, this is a qualm that most people have with art schools in general. So I don't know, I don't want to I don't want to knock my own art school for this, but it's difficult to to put together a curriculum to teach artists how to market their work, and how to be self-sufficient.
A lot of artists and art schools are allergic to that language. They'd find it to be offensive. Like,
Yeah.
the business. Carlo. The guy who was my mentor. He hated the idea that artists should be trained as business people. Right. There is a kind of in the art community, there was kind of a political impulse to be at odds with the moneyed culture, but at the same time,
Yes.
that was the patronage culture too. So it was a really bizarre schizophrenic relationship they had with money, I thought.
Absolutely. And on top of that, you've got people who assign these ridiculous standards to artists. Like, the number of times I've been told that I've sold out, just for like,
Right.
it's like whatever, people can say whatever they want. It's just people are bitter to see other artists, thinking that they might have compromised their vision in some way, shape, and form in order to put bread on the table, and it's just like, it's amazing how adversarial the general public can be toward an artist who's just trying to get by. Like and I think part of it is fueled by social media. Part of it is fueled by just media in general.
Mhm.
The general public is used to consuming art for either free or pennies, right? Like, we're used to listening to music for free on the radio. We're used to watching TV shows on TV, or we're used to watching YouTube videos for free, and we don't think about the time, energy, and money that it takes for these creators to create the product, and
Mhm.
we're not used to compensating them for that. And so I think it's an interesting movement happening on the internet right now, where First off, I'm noticing that people care a lot more about crediting the artist than they used to, which I think is a fantastic thing. That they want to give the artist recognition for the work they do, because it's now become more understood colloquially that when you give artists credit, it gives them more opportunities to get work. Like the
Yeah.
exposure matters. And I think that's a wonderful change that I'm witnessing currently, just from my perspective. But I also find that people are very adversarial. And I'll knock TikTok for this one. Now, TikTok, as you know, you're on TikTok as well, so you're probably aware
Oh,
that the
it's like I compare it to, do you remember Narnia when they killed the lion?
yeah.
It's those creatures. Those cackling hyena demon bat creatures. That's what they seem like to me. They're like, just like, who are they? And you look at them, they'll have like 5 followers, and you don't know where, they're like nobodies, but they're the biggest mouths. Is that what you're gonna say? Maybe you're saying something slightly different.
Oh yeah. I mean, not only have I gotten a lot of like flack on TikTok, but also I think TikTok is mostly currently like a Zoomer audience. So it's a lot of children who don't have money yet. And that makes sense because they're kids. They don't have access to a credit card. They cannot, they do not have the ability to support the content creators they care about. And like, I get that. But the problem is when that becomes your audience, it gets tricky when you're doing something like a live stream. I'm creating live art and people just spam the chat saying they want me to make something. And you go through the comments on all of my videos and it's just people spamming the comments saying, make this next, make this next. Like people just like dance, monkey dance, like it's just, there's no respect. There is no, and they don't understand that they're being exceedingly rude because they're children and they don't have a lot of experience being on the internet yet or thinking about how their words come across to those who read them. And so, it's like, I can't even get a please from people who ask me to do stuff. They literally just like, make this next, like, just like commanding me from their screens on their phones. And it's like, it's like, wow, would it kill you to pay me? Like, of course they're not going to pay me, but they can't even they can't even say please. So it's like, I have a rather adversarial relationship with my TikTok platform because while I appreciate the audience immensely, I also recognize that they're not really supporting me financially. So it's like there's intense benefits to having this audience, and it makes it easier for me to market myself as a successful content creator when I have a huge platform for which to share the content. And when I do these live streams on TikTok, I get these wonderful, super active live streams where literally thousands of people are watching me. And I'm getting wonderful dialogue with people and having a good time. But I also recognize that, like, it's crazy to think about. I know I've been in an extremely fortunate place. So I definitely don't want to sound ungrateful by any means. But it is something that I think is, isn't talked about a lot, specifically with TikTok. I'll have a live stream where, 50 to 60,000 people will tune in. And at any given time, there might be up to 2,000 people actively watching in any given moment. And that's insane. Like at that point, I cannot read the chat because the people commenting is going 50 miles an hour. And I'm creating the live art and I'm having a good time. And people have the ability to donate during the live stream. Now, there's never an expectation, but there's always the hope that people donate because when I get donations, it encourages me to keep doing this because it justifies the time that I'm spending doing it beyond just like getting new followers. So, one would expect that if you were to have a wildly successful live stream on a social media platform, that you might hit a certain amount of money, like at least minimum wage, right? No. I've been lucky to get I think my most successful live stream was like $20 in 2 hours. That's how much I got in donations, which that's great. I was just having fun creating art on an Etch-a-Sketch, but as a business person, I need to be fully aware of the fact that like my time needs to have some degree of compensation to it to justify the time that I'm spending with these people in front of my cell phone instead of going and doing whatever I want to do. Like I could go hang out with my boyfriend. I could go take a walk. I could go, I could go work on something else if I want, or find a way to make a more profitable use of my time. So it's an interesting conundrum because on one hand, I recognize that I'm not necessarily profiting from my platform on TikTok in a monetary sense, but then there are other fringe benefits like marketing. Like there's a possibility that companies will want to work with me because I have an engaging TikTok account and they want to use my account as a platform for them to advertise their product. And they might pay me for that because they recognize that they'll have access to my audience. So it's like, those are like that's the kind of clientele that I hope to get through TikTok, not necessarily the 12-year-old kids watching my stream, because I still enjoy doing those streams. Absolutely, it's lots of fun, but I just recognize that like they're not profitable for me.
Yeah, it's for us, is for our business, is brand awareness for sure.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
for
that
sure.
and that has value. Absolutely, it's advertising, it's marketing,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but it does not bring in
Yeah.
dollars and cents.
The comments are just so funny. One comment was, it was about our blocks, Lux blocks. The comment was, but will this save my parents' marriage?
Oh, geez.
I said, well, we built Lux blocks with love, so maybe love will save your parents' marriage. What do you say? And I try to give video responses to the real questions, right? And I actually enjoy that more than sometimes the posts I do, or the video responses to questions, because
I agree. The interactivity on the app is fantastic like that. Yeah.
Well, before we go, is there anything you want to tell? I mean, you just moved from Chicago, recently, relatively, to Baltimore, right?
Yeah. I'm in a suburb of Baltimore. Yeah.
So it seemed to me, I know Baltimore. Baltimore has hits and misses in Baltimore. So, and you were kind of sad to move. Has Baltimore been a nice experience for you?
Well, it's a little difficult for me to tell because just now things are opening back up again. Right. I think 2 days ago is when the mask mandate was lifted here in the state of Maryland.
I was actually in Baltimore when they closed the state down, right in the middle of a convention I paid dearly to be in, and they shut my convention down. I didn't get my money back. So I had to leave Baltimore with my tail between my legs because the governor shut the state down. So that's the last time I was there. So you've been in Baltimore while the COVID's been going on, so you really haven't experienced it, you're saying?
Yeah, I haven't experienced it much. And it's I have a unique perspective on my experience here because I'm actually in Chicago. I never drove because I lived in the city. There was public transit. I was completely self-sufficient getting around. Well, I never got around to getting my driver's license. So I'm working on that right now. And it's been a clunky experience, but I have been mostly, I mean, my boyfriend lives with me. He's got a car and stuff, but like, I don't want him to be my chauffeur, like for the most part, I've been like generally housebound for like the last 6 months. We'll go out and do things, but it is absolutely necessary to get a vehicle where I live now, as is true with most of America. And that's going to really have an impact on, my future plans out here. But fortunately, I do have to say that I learned during pandemic that I do not depend on living in Chicago as my sole source of income. Right. Now I had a solid amount of local work in Chicago, and I had fantastic local press. Chicago's been very good to me. Right. But of course, when pandemic happened, all of my local gigs just fell off the map. So I had to work a lot more remotely. And thankfully, I'm in a position where most of the work I do is 100% remote. Like, I do commissioned work where I mail my art, ship it out, send it to anywhere in the world. And then I do a lot of video work, which is just delivered digitally. Most of my clients I only interact with via email. So it's interesting.
I forgot to ask, do your clients usually expect or request that you do a little video of you making the art?
Well, it depends. I definitely charge a premium for the video. Okay. So, if they want it and they're willing to pay for it, by all means. But a lot of my commissioned work is just I send them the Etch-a-Sketch, and then that's that.
Yeah. And you drill the hole in the back and you empty out the aluminum, and then is that how you usually do it?
That's my old method, which I've still done on occasion, and I do that for event work. So the events and the workshops are the two in-person things that I lost my income in during pandemic. So that'll be really interesting to see if I can find a new market here on the East Coast for that. And I also travel too, so that's not a big deal. But my current preservation method is I saw apart the Etch-a-Sketch. I disassemble all of the components. and then I clean out the inside of the Etch-a-Sketch, and then I gut out the stylus and all of the internal mechanical components inside of the Etch-a-Sketch, and then I reassemble it all back together. And then you've got like a permanent. That's another way to make the Etch-a-Sketch permanent. So
How long does that take to do? It sounds really laborious.
It is laborious, and it can take, for a small Etch-a-Sketch, it can take, from finishing the art to making it permanent, like an hour and a half just for that one Etch-a-Sketch. So I definitely have to charge a premium for when I do that. But I also work in batches, which really helps. I don't like to do the whole preservation process for a single Etch-a-Sketch because there's a lot of setup associated with that. So what I'll do is I'll time things out where I do 3 or 4 at the same time. So I have to saw them apart. That's done individually. But when I clean them out and reassemble and disassemble them all, I'll do 3 or 4 at a time. And that definitely lowers the average amount of time it takes for me to do them.
So you'll saw it after the drawing is done?
Yeah, sometimes before, sometimes after.
Will the vibrations mess up the drawing? Isn't there a danger of ruining the art?
So thankfully, if you keep the Etch-a-Sketch flat, even with a lot of vibrations from the saw, it's totally okay. If I were to, because I usually saw after I'm done. Sometimes I'll saw off. There's like an outer frame and an inner frame. Right. In fact, where is it? Yeah, I've got this one right here. This Etch-a-Sketch right here, I just sold recently. And you can see here that I've sawed apart the outer frame, and this is what the inside box looks like.
Right.
So then I just saw through this inside box, and then I clean it out.
And that doesn't mess up the screen. That's amazing.
No. Yep. It stays totally fine. I think if I were to, as long as I keep the Etch-a-Sketch face up, it would take a lot to jostle the Etch-a-Sketch enough for the powder to kick up onto this.
Do you have like a special shed you use with a mask and stuff? Because it must be very messy.
It is very messy. I use I have a preservation space on the lowest level of my house that I use that is dedicated only to that region of.
Is there a vacuum on your saw? Do you have a vacuum on your saw?
I don't. Well, so for the sawing, I do it manually. Here's my little saw here. I saw manually, which helps to keep things a little bit more stagnant. It doesn't get as airborne. If I were using like an electrical saw, then it would really kick things up. But when I'm sawing the outside of the Etch-a-Sketch, it's just little plastic shavings, so it doesn't make much of a mess.
Okay.
But then when I clean out the Etch-a-Sketch, I submerge it in water to keep the powder from getting too airborne.
Okay.
So that helps to contain things, and then I wear a mask. So yeah, there's a lot of protocol, and I wear gloves. Now and then inevitably there's a little bit of the powder that gets a bit airborne. But it really helps to mitigate it. My main MO in preservation of an Etch-a-Sketch is is to basically keep that powder from going everywhere, because it's so thin. It could be like a smoke, and it just coats everything within its vicinity.
Right.
Yeah, it's the bane of my life. It's absolutely the worst part of my job. But it's why I have to charge what I charge, because even if there are other people who create art on Etch-a-Sketch, there are plenty of people who are fantastic artists who want nothing to do with the preservation process, because they understand just how tedious and difficult and messy it is.
Well, yeah, I did pastel portraits, and I tell people, be prepared. Whatever I'm charging you for this portrait, you might have to pay the same amount to put it on a board and put it under glass, because you have to put it under glass, because you can't put it in plastic, because the particulates will stick to the plastic of transparent plastic, right? So yeah, to make artwork permanent is expensive, especially if it's on paper. It's just crazy. Yeah.
I framed a watercolor painting for a client a few years ago, and I cared a lot about preserving the quality of the painting, so I bought some
acid-free stuff.
Acid free. I use just the sheet of watercolor paper alone was $6 that I painted it on.
Right.
And I bought a custom frame that I had done with, and I got it had to be shipped, so I used acrylic instead of glass, because I wanted to make sure it didn't get broken in the mail.
Right.
And it was 96% UV resistant. I upgraded the quality so that it could be better longevity for the watercolor painting. And I instructed the client, don't put it in direct sunlight.
Yep.
Yeah, go put it on a wall that gets a little less love from the sun. Just it'll take a long time for it to fade, but you can mitigate that in any way, shape, or form that's in your best interest. And that frame cost me $300, and that was Now it was a custom job, of course, but like that's not unheard of at all for custom framing. And that in itself, I used to do some of the framing at my job at the photography boutique. Custom framing is a whole different monster. It is like we would get the frames made from another manufacturer, but I would then be tasked with framing the art and putting it in in the glass. That can take hours in itself.
Yeah,
just
and
to
artists never use square canvases either. They're always off, right?
Yeah. And so, just the things like there's just so many tedious aspects to framing a work correctly. We had like air pressure cans to remove dust particulates, because once those dust particulates are stuck between the glass and the art, you're never going to not see it. Your eyes just going to be drawn to it.
Right.
And then, there's just so many minute, tedious aspects of it. Now, thankfully, most of the minutia within Etch-a-Sketch art is something I enjoy, and I have to enjoy it for it to be my business, because otherwise I think it would have made me go crazy years ago. But the Etch-a-Sketch preservation, it takes a lot to motivate me to get up and start preserving them. That's the hardest part of my job by far.
So if people want to buy a portrait or a custom work by Jane, is it Labowitch?
Yeah, Labowitch, yep.
Labowitch, yeah. Where do they go?
You can go to princessetch.com. It's got all the links to my social medias and what have you. I sell work primarily through Etsy, which also has the same username, Princess Etch. And then you could also reach out to me directly, and we can have a conversation from there. But that's a great place to check. If you want to see my base commission pricing, it is publicly available on Etsy to give anyone an idea of how much it might cost.
Do you also sell spec art, like art you've already made?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I have a section on my Etsy page for art that I've already created. So you could get original art that I've already done, or you can commission an original piece. I also sell prints and other related products, stickers, etc. I try to cater to multiple price points to allow my art to be accessible to the masses. So
Right, that's awesome. And is there anything you want, any plans you want to tell us about that are coming up? Anything on the horizon that's interesting for you? Going to France or somewhere interesting?
Ooh, I don't have any current travel planned, but I do plan to spend a lot more time in New York City over the next few years. I'm now a quick bus ride away. I'm about 3 hours away from New York City now. So that's super exciting. That's one of my favorite things about moving to the East Coast. I'd like to spend a lot more time in the Big Apple. Yeah.
That sounds awesome. Hey, listen, we're going to keep talking for a few minutes after Facebook Live, but we're going to go off Facebook Live now. So
Okay.
Thanks again for being here, and we'll talk in a second, okay?
All right.
Okay.